Nick Pope worked for the British government for 21 years as a civilian employee at the Ministry of Defense. He took early retirement in 2006 after having attained a rank of acting deputy director. During the 90s, Nick was Britain's defense point person responsible for monitoring and archiving UFO events in the UK, somewhat similar to the role that Luis Elizondo plays or has played at the Pentagon. Nick is frequently called upon by news outlets as a former British government spokesperson, offering insights on sensitive UFO issues taken more seriously by the American mainstream press since the December 16th announcements about our Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Detection Program. Nick now lives in the United States. He's married to an American, and he works as a consultant and a spokesperson. He's the author of 3 nonfiction books, 2 science fiction novels, and a thriller called Blood Brothers, which is due to be published this fall. Additionally, Nick writes for a number of British national newspapers and works on various science fiction projects for movies and TV in Hollywood. And he also works for a video game company. He is a regular on Ancient Aliens and NASA Unexplained Files. Although retired from the Ministry of Defense, he is involved in a 10-year program to declassify and release Britain's UFO files, many of which have now been made public. So please join me in giving a very, very warm welcome to Mr. Nick Pope.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much indeed for that generous introduction, and thank you all for attending. I hope you're finding this whole conference as interesting and enjoyable as I am. I am going to be doing something rather different today, speaking not so much about UFOs, but doing really an entirely new presentation, The World in 2045, and we'll get to that in a moment. But of course, I do want to mention a couple of things that are more UFO related before I get into the main body of my presentation. Firstly, of course, and I think MUFON have achieved a huge coup here in having him attend, and it's great that he's here. The revelations of Luis Elizondo about the Pentagon's ATIP program have been nothing short of revelatory. I think they are interesting in and of themselves, but I think that what Luis Elizondo and his colleagues are now doing in terms of facilitating a conversation with the American people, trying to take this issue forward, is extraordinary and worthwhile work. And I, for one, have seen, I think, an attitudinal shift, particularly when it comes to the media, over how this subject was treated compared to a few months ago. When you consider that the New York Times ran that story on December 16th, and then we had the videos as part of that story of the Navy F-18s chasing these UFOs, tic-tac, gimbal, and go fast. What I have noticed now, and I speak to you firstly as somebody who writes articles and features for newspapers myself, predominantly in the UK. So I speak with my journalist hat on, but also, I guess, in the capacity of someone who is frequently interviewed by other journalists. I've noticed that since the Pentagon ATIP story came out, there has been, as I say, this seismic shift in the way that the media treat this. Yes, sure, there is some, there's still some ridicule and stigma out there. And you still sometimes get the UFO features on the TV that start with the X-Files music and the funny lights and the kind of tongue-in-cheek comments. But you know what? you can tell that behind the laughter and the jokes, those journalists, those TV hosts, take it a little bit more seriously than they did before we knew about the Pentagon's program. And I mean, the reason, of course, is self-evident. For years, people who said that the US government must have a program, that all these denials, I think they've quietly taken most of them down now, but if you go onto the websites and use the Wayback Machine, you can probably still find those statements out there saying, since Project Blue Book was terminated at the end of 1969, the US government takes no interest in this subject, and no agency undertakes any research and investigation. Well, people that said, but that can't be true, there must be a program, the government must be doing something on this, you were derided as conspiracy theorists and nut jobs. And now guess what? You were right. So, you know, it used to be a case of those crazy people who thought that the government had a secret program to investigate UFOs. Now it's just those people who were right about it. You, a large number of you in the audience, and I thank you for it, you are the people who were right. So well done. And I hope that's a clap that you're giving yourselves and not me, because because you deserve it. You know, the ridicule, the little comments from family and friends, and now you can say to those people, those work colleagues, family, friends, whoever it was, you know, wait a minute, it's on the front page of the New York Times, it's in the Washington Post, it's in Politico, it's on CNN, it's on Fox. I did 2 appearances on Tucker Carlson Tonight on Fox News in the last 6 weeks. Luis Elizondo's been on. Leslie Kane, who is an investigative journalist who's done a lot to push this story, she was on. David Fravor was on. Chris Mellon was on. You know, suddenly there's a whole bunch of people talking about this, and it's not on a conspiracy website or a New Age journal. It's in the Times and the Post and CNN and Fox and ABC, NBC. It's everywhere. So the door is open to an extent that I haven't seen before. These are exciting times. There's talk of congressional hearings. There's talk of maybe restarting a public program like Blue Book. So the door is open a crack, and I think there are some people there who are now going to try and kick that door wide open. So again, well done to those people, I think. I've never been more enthused about what is happening in this community, and I characterize it as, and apologies to Lou if I'm stealing a line from him here, I don't know which of us said it first, but this subject is moving out of the fringe and into the mainstream in a way that I've not seen before. And before I get to the main body of my presentation, which is something slightly different, I just want to briefly compare and contrast, I suppose, the 2 programs. ATIP was obviously something that the public did not know about. The work that I did in the British government for the Ministry of Defense, we were a public program. People could pick up the phone, call us up, report a sighting. They could send letters to us, and we would send letters back. So in that sense, we were more like Blue Book than ATIP. Having said that, there was a classified side of it, of course. The Defense Intelligence staff at the Ministry of Defense produced an intelligence assessment, which is, I think, worth your time. It's on the National Archives website. It's called, because we do this kind of thing, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in the United Kingdom Air Defense Region. As the Ministry of Defense say, why use one word when about 20 will do? It's typical bureaucrat. And notice that we used the word UAP. This was deliberate. It had a couple of effects. Firstly, it made, and I apologize for this, firstly, it made Freedom of Information Act requests a little bit more tricky. Send us all your information on UFOs. Well, we have some low-level stuff. Send us all your information on UAPs. We would have to send maybe more. The other point about UAP as opposed to UFO is it enabled us internally in the Ministry of Defense to reframe the debate on the phenomenon and to get funding for it and to get serious intelligence assessments done in a way that would never have happened if we'd have talked about UFOs. So it was quite deliberate, this shift from UFO to UAP. Not really for the public, that came later when some of these documents did come out, but UAP was our way of getting defense ministers and service chiefs to take the issue seriously and give us some funding. And they did, and we got it. And I was amused to see how this kind of language crossed the Atlantic. In June of 2011, I attended a briefing in DC, which was chaired by John Podesta, who used to be President Obama's chief of staff and ran Hillary's unsuccessful campaign. And I briefed Podesta and a number of other people with connections to government and military and intelligence community on what we at the Ministry of Defense had done. And by the way, I didn't, I brief anyone who asks. This is not a political issue. When I say things like I briefed Podesta or I went on to Fox, this is neither a Democratic nor a Republican, nor indeed libertarian or anything else. This is not a political issue. It should not be. It is, UFOs are apolitical. They don't vote. Anyway, I was amused that a couple of years after I briefed John Podesta, I saw Hillary do an interview on Jimmy Kimmel, and she got asked about UFOs, and she said, no, there's a new term, and it's UAP. And I thought, oh, I did that. So we were a public program. We took our data predominantly from the public, though obviously we had many reports from Air Force pilots, other military personnel, commercial airline pilots, radar operators. But most of our data by volume came from the public. I think in one sense, if as a UFO project you confine yourself to just military sightings, you miss out on a vast body of data. So we took reports from everyone, but as I say, there was a classified side to it. The document Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in the UK Air Defence Region is worth your time. Google it, you'll be able to find it. It's declassified, 468 pages, formally secret UK eyes only, and couple of the interesting take-home messages. I mean, it basically said UFOs are real, whatever they are. This is a real phenomenon. There's more here than just aircraft lights and weather balloons. And it went on to say that clearly some of the speeds and maneuvers being reported, not just eyewitness testimony, though that's important in and of itself, but radar data as well, gun camera footage. The speeds and maneuvers were significantly in excess of what we had. So the take-home message was, there's something in our airspace, it's faster than us, we don't know what it is. That's not a good place for a government to be in. That actually explains some of the secrecy. Not all of it, some of it. It's the embarrassment factor. No government, no Air Force, no Navy can really say, we have lost control of our airspace. It's an untenable statement. And yet, that is the clear implication of some of the declassified documents that I'm talking about, that you can check for yourselves. This is not anonymous documents showing up in someone's mailbox. This is something that you can go to the Ministry of Defense website, National Archives website, and read them. This is why I'm going to give you some very specific titles, like UAP in the UK Air Defence Region, so that you can follow along. Check them out afterwards, read them. One of the other interesting statements that it made in that declassified study was that it said that there would be novel military applications quote unquote, that might derive from a fuller understanding of the UFO phenomenon, whatever that might turn out to be. And it went on to talk about things like directed energy weapons and such like. Apologies to the New Age people. I know this doesn't go down very well. I suppose it's a case of like the classic Richard Burton movie, The Medusa Touch, where he says, we find what powers the sun and we make bombs of it. But if you embed a UFO project in the Ministry of Defense, that's what you get. People talk about weaponization. People talk about military applications. That's just a construct of where you put the program. The French do it a different way. This came up in a panel discussion that I was just on. The French government is one of the only governments around the world that embeds their UFO program not in the Defense Ministry or the Air Force, but in their space center. And it's a different, I think it's arguably a better way of doing it. So I just wanted briefly to say about this, and the UK government is coming to the end of a 10-year program to declassify and release a lot of this information, not all of it, but a lot of it, 60,000 documents declassified and released so far by the Ministry of Defense on UFOs, some of them at levels of classification which were formerly secret UK eyes only, like the declassified intelligence assessment I just mentioned. 60,000 pages, not bad for a subject which for years we told the British Parliament, the media, and the public we weren't really interested in. Can you imagine any organization having 60,000 documents on a subject it's not really interested in? Doesn't make sense. There was a kind of Orwellian doublethink that we had to employ sometimes working there. It was like one answer for the public, one kind of thing that we told ourselves, in private. One time I went to a briefing about this. I think I've told this anecdote before, but bear with me for those of you who haven't heard it. I went to a briefing on the UFO phenomenon over with my colleagues at the Defense Intelligence Staff, and the briefer had a great photo which we'd acquired a few years ago. Huge diamond-shaped craft, daylight, over Scotland, military jet in the background, apparently either chasing or escorting this object. We in the Ministry of Defense could not track down that military aircraft. How weird is that? Again, for those of you who talk about deep black programs and shadow government and such like. The briefer said to my skeptical boss, well, look at that photo. He said, it's been analyzed by the MOD's imagery analysis experts with all the resources and capabilities that you would expect Air Force, as it was at the time, imagery analysts to have, assessed as genuine. This thing could hover and then took off vertically at immense speed. The briefer started gesticulating, and he said, it's not the Americans. He said, it's not the Russians. And he said, and that only leaves... and my boss looked at his finger, and he looks up at the ceiling, and he said afterwards, he said to me, boss, he said to me, Nick, he said, did he mean the Chinese? And I'm like, no, boss, he did not mean the Chinese. Anyway, as I say, the British government's declassifying and releasing a lot of this information about my old job. That's one of the reasons why I've got a couple of appearances on shows like Tucker Carlson Tonight recently, more mainstream interest in this, in the offing, exciting times. Okay, enough about UFOs. I never thought I would hear myself say that. Enough about UFOs. I will get back to it. This is a completely different presentation about what the world might look like in 2045. And that really ties in with the theme of this entire conference, the future of humanity. And why am I giving this presentation? Why am I saying what will the world be like in 2045? It's because when we consider UFOs and extraterrestrials and disclosure and whatever we believe about that, we sometimes, I think, treat that equation, if it's an equation, we sometimes regard the human part of that equation as being fixed. Well, you know, there are all sorts of variables and unknowns about aliens, but we're just us. Wrong, we're not. The point, the central point of what I'm about to present is that disclosure or discovery or whatever we like to call it will be very different depending on when it happens, because we as humans will be very different and we will inhabit a very different world. I'm sure most of you here think, as I think, wow, the world now is incredibly different to when I was a kid. And you're right, but you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, we are on one heck of a ride. It's like a roller coaster, but if you were to plot it out as a graph, you would see, I think, an almost exponential rise in technology and scientific discovery, and we're on that journey, and we're on the cusp of something very exciting. And as I say, the world is going to be very different in 2045. And so if disclosure or discovery happens in 2045, it's going to be radically different from if it happens tonight, because we'll be very different. How do I know this? Before we get, let's put up a couple of my favorite quotes. I went in 2010, I attended 2 Royal Society discussion meetings. Some of the other speakers, I think, were here too. Ted Peters certainly was at that meeting and spoke. Stephen Dick is a former NASA chief historian. And he said, not if, when we discover extraterrestrial life, we might find that we're living in a largely post-biological universe populated by immortal thinking machines. And I was like, what did he just say? And I had to remind myself that I was at the Royal Society and not at a sci-fi convention. But that's what he said. And the titles of these 2 Royal Society discussion meetings, the first one was called The Detection of Extraterrestrial Life and the Consequences for Science and Society. And the second one was called Towards a Societal Agenda on Extraterrestrial Life. If any skeptic friends ever tell you scientists don't take this seriously, no one's looking at this, studying it, thinking it, oh yes they are. If they weren't, the Royal Society wouldn't be putting on discussion meetings about it. We'll get into AI a little bit more later. Arthur C. Clarke's classic thing, quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. How do I know this? What is the source of this presentation? Am I just winging it and guessing what the world will be like in 2045? No, I am not. This is the main source for this presentation. I would urge you to Google it, find it. You will be able to find and read that document online freely on the Ministry of Defense website. It's not classified. I was amazed that it's not classified, but it's not classified. And until and unless they think, oops, we should have classified that, it's out there. It's worth your time. And unlike a lot of stories that you sometimes hear circulating in this field, the reason I'm putting up the front cover of this document is so that you can check everything I say. You can fact check it. We hear a lot these days about fake news and such like. Fact check me. Fact check this presentation by afterwards downloading this document and reading it. You will be staggered. You should be. Why is the Ministry of Defense producing this sort of document? It's produced by the Defense Doctrine and Concepts organization, which is part of the MOD, that tries to look into the future. A good example of why looking, say, 30 years into the future is a good idea. Second World War. For little bit of history. In the run-up to the Second World War, navies all around the world were obsessed with battleships. How many battleships have we got? How fast are they? How powerful are they? How heavily armored are they? Battleships, battleships, battleships. Turned out to be almost irrelevant in strategic terms. The aircraft carrier and the submarine turned out to be far more important in strategic terms. A bit of better long-term planning and thought, a little bit of blue sky thinking about what the future holds, might have enabled navies to realize slightly earlier than they did that it would be the aircraft carrier and the submarine, not the battleship or the heavy cruiser, say, that was going to play a decisive role. So the Ministry of Defense has its doctrine and concepts organization, and they do a forward look, and in some senses they think the unthinkable. But they don't do this themselves. They do this together with industry, big aerospace corporations. They do it with the scientific community. They do it with academia. And they do it with other nations and the military. And they publish this document to enable them to try and do, if you build a new aircraft carrier, I mean, from the time that you scope the concept to the time that you actually launch that ship, do the trials, and have it become operational, you are talking many, many years. The procurement times on big defense projects are vast. So you need to have an idea what the world will look like, not just tomorrow, next week, but 10, 20, 30 years' time, which is why the Ministry of Defense do studies like this. And it's very funny. I mentioned Orwellian doublethink. In the preface to that, they say, it is not our intention to predict the future. And then they go on to do just that. I mean, of course, you know, what else is this? It is a look at every single category of life, whether it's the environment, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transportation, whether it's medicine. It looks at all of those categories, and it does a deep dive into what people are working on, what discoveries or inventions are likely upcoming, and how this will affect society. Because at the end of the day, defense and the military doesn't exist in a vacuum. So we have to know what's coming. This is a separate document, again, freely available on the internet, published on the Ministry of Defense website just a couple of weeks ago. Human-machine teaming. It's a term you will be hearing a lot more about over the next few years. Hopefully in a good way, maybe not in such a good way. But again, read that document. If this sort of thing interests you, it's worth your time. I love whoever does the graphics for the Ministry of Defense. Yeah, it's good stuff. That's not a graphic. That's a real thing. That's a photograph, not a mock-up. This is Tyrannus, named for the Celtic god of thunder. Tyrannus is a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle. It will be capable of flying thousands of miles and unleashing hell upon the bad guys. Sorry, I know, again, not very new age, not very friendly, but I'm talking about military stuff. So of course you get this sort of thing. So this is a real thing. This picture was taken at the rollout a few years ago that was jointly done by the Ministry of Defense and BAE Systems Limited, who actually built it. And is it me, or are they bending over backwards to make this thing look deliberately like your favorite sci-fi meme of a saucer in a hangar? Well, that's our saucer in a hangar, and it's a perfectly real picture. This exists, and it's old technology. If this is the stuff they're telling you about, what aren't they telling you about? Again, think back to what I said about the procurement lead times. Stealth is a good example. Flying for years before it was publicly acknowledged, and if I told you how far back the design concept and basic initial research on stealth went, you probably wouldn't believe me. FCAV, Future Combat Air Vehicle, that one isn't a photograph. That is a mock-up, but it is a mock-up, again, taken from the Ministry of Defense website in the UK. UK Ministry of Defense, for anyone that doesn't know, is simply the British equivalent of your DoD. It serves as a policy-making Department of State, and it is also the UK's highest level military headquarters. I was a civilian employee there for 21 years, only 3 years of which were on the UFO program. My last job was in the Directorate of Defense Security, but that is another story. FCAV, again, an Anglo-French project. I'm showing you these images for two reasons. Firstly, to show you the sort of stuff that is actually already out there on government websites. And like I say, if this is the stuff they're telling you about, what are they keeping back? If you saw that, if they build this in a couple of years' time and you see that, you'll probably think you've seen a UFO. That's one of the reasons why it's really important, and I know MUFON get this, and a number of other UFO organizations and researchers do too. You have to develop, if you're a UFO investigator, a good understanding of secret prototype aircraft and drones. Even if you obviously don't have the security clearance to know about them, you have to figure, what can I piece together about the capabilities of these things from open source material like this? Again, I think things like that are astounding, and I'm just showing them to you. Like I say, the last one, this is real. We've already built that. That's coming soon to skies near you. Let's get on to, I talked about flying thousands of miles and unleashing hell upon the bad guys. I just want to get in, I want to read this onto the record. The UK does not possess fully autonomous weapons systems and has no intention of developing them. Such systems are not yet in existence and are not likely to be for many years, if at all. The UK government's policy is clear that the operation of UK weapons will always be under human control as an absolute guarantee of human oversight, authority, and accountability. A worthy statement, if true. a worthy statement. It may be more aspirational than practical. I mean, heck, we actually have pretty much fully autonomous systems anyway. For those of you that know and have served on Navy ships, I mean, it's not the same as the AI that I'm going to go on to talk about, but there are automatic systems like Phalanx that track and then open fire on an incoming missile without a human being necessarily having to make a decision. So at the moment, that is the British government's policy. I'm not sure whether the US government have made a similar or identical statement. You know, I think that's a question to ask. A number of different nations have a number of different policies on this, but my goodness, what the Russians and the Chinese are up to, I don't know. And bear in mind, again, a lot of this work when it comes to robotics and AI is going on not in government at all, but in the private sector. And if you try and use congressional oversight and Freedom of Information Act to hold government to account, well, it's a little bit more difficult to hold the Chinese or the Russians to account, and it's a little bit more difficult to hold the tech billionaires and the venture capitalists of Silicon Valley, those sorts of people, to account. And clearly, when it comes to the next generation of technology, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Yuri Milner are going to be hugely important players in this, alongside government. Just want to pick out a few quotes. I mean, I'm just taking a few bits at random, well, not quite at random, from the Global Strategic Trends document. We talk about quantum computing, and there is a lot of information in Global Strategic Trends out to 2045 about personal privacy. Obviously, this is an issue that a lot of people feel very strongly about. My goodness, if George Orwell could see things now. You know, 1984 turned out to be true. So, some experts believe that quantum computing may make all codes crackable and genuine encryption impossible, as theoretically a quantum computer could try every possible combination of codes simultaneously to unlock a system. It's like you try an infinite combination of numbers simultaneously at once. The only way to defeat that kind of quantum computing is quantum encryption, where you simultaneously change the codes at every moment. But this is going, make no mistake about it, this is going to be like missiles and anti-missiles and anti-missiles. It's going to go back and forward. And I know a lot of people, certainly in military and intelligence work, who are now, you know, working on computers that are not connected to the internet, and they're not even connected to the intranet. You know, there are discrete networks, standalone networks, not connected to anything else. And you know what? If I was a betting man, I'd say some agencies are probably going back to typing stuff and sticking them in paper files. And some people are going to a culture of not writing stuff down at all, unless they can possibly avoid it. And that raises some legal questions, but it's worth mentioning. I mean, I remember the UK's Freedom of Information Act is much more recent than the act that you have in the US, but I remember a discussion with my boss where he said something like, oh, this has happened, we'd better, I'm going to write a note to so-and-so. And I said, don't forget that that note will be FOIable, you'll create a paper trail. And he went, you know what, maybe I'll just walk down the corridor and talk to him. And I suddenly realized I had come perilously close to breaking the law. My remark might have been seen as an encouragement not to create a paper trail, and that, if it's a deliberate intent to circumnavigate the act, that would be an offense. But those of you who are or have recently served in government and military, I'm sure will be familiar with the culture of, you know what, I think I'm just going to walk down the corridor and chat this over with someone. And I've sat at meetings where the person chairing the meeting has said something like, and now, not for the record, please, I want to discuss this. And then you get, even when minutes are written up, you get these wonderfully bland statements. Like, for example, I was, in my last job in the Directorate of Defense Security, I once went to a meeting where there was a detailed half-hour discussion of a number of counter-terrorist operations and initiatives. And it went on, and it covered all sorts of things that obviously I can't go into. And when the minutes of the meeting were written up, it just said, the committee then discussed a wide range of security issues. That was it. Again, a direct quote from Global Strategic Trends out to 2045. Some augmentation of humans with embedded sensors and computing devices is likely to occur within the 2045 timeframe. Mind-controlled machinery is likely to become much more sophisticated, with human brain-to-brain communication possible by 2045. What? It's there in the document. You can read it on the website. The reason it says mind-controlled machinery is likely to become much more sophisticated, of course, is that we have the infancy of that technology already. But obviously this is back to the point about the exponential graph, if you plot this out visually. Direct interfacing. It is possible that direct brain-to-brain communication may be achieved by 2045, transforming ways of working. The Ministry of Defense sometimes has a habit of stating the bloomin' obvious. These methods could involve collaboration and using directly shared knowledge and experience between humans, brackets, and potentially between humans and other species. Again, what does that mean? Does that mean the farmer will telepathically communicate to the cows that it's time for milking and they'd better move out of their field and into the cow shed? Or when it talks about other species, is it one of those speculative what if? You know, remember, at that briefing that I mentioned, nothing was ever said. No words or phrases such as aliens or extraterrestrial were ever uttered in that briefing. The closest that we got was a vague reference to these people. Well, you know, these people come here and they have these capabilities, and we don't know what these people want and what their agenda might be, but maybe we can learn something from these people. There was before that declassified intelligence assessment was commissioned, and I didn't write it, but I was involved in the work that led to it being set up. There was a document, and it said, basically, talking about UAP, it said, we could use this technology if it exists. I mean, again, it goes back to that quote I mentioned, novel military applications will derive from a fuller understanding of the UFO phenomenon, whatever it may turn out to be. So, direct interfacing, as well as potentially transforming both sensing and decision-making, direct brain linkage could have profound implications for social interaction and for the notion of what it means to be an individual human being. Notions of individuality could be challenged, possibly leading to questioning of loyalties and allegiances to organizations as individuals and group identities merge. An incredible statement for a government document to make. We are the Borg. I mean, it didn't say that. But it might well, it might well as well have done. This, what it means to be human, the idea of that possibly breaking down. By 2045, it is even possible, although unlikely, that the sharp distinctions between people and machine will disappear. Even if they say it's unlikely, the fact that they're saying that it's possible is profound, has profound implications for all of us and what it means to be human and the journey that we are on and the choices that we may have to make. One of the most interesting sections in Global Strategic Trends out to 2045 is the section that discusses artificial intelligence and robots. It says that certainly by 2045, robots will be, unlike anything that you think of as a robot now. Probably humaniform, possibly indistinguishable from actual human beings. Computer processing power doubles every 3 years. What is that, Moore's law, is it, I think? By 2023, the estimate is that computers might possess processing power equivalent to that of a human being. By 2045, one prediction is that it will be 100,000 times more powerful. At what point, and the report didn't get into this. I always want in my presentations to make it clear when I move away from what I know and what I think. I'm moving away now into speculation. This is not in the document. But, of course, there are profound questions that this raises about what it means to be human. I mean, the report did go that far, but you can't really discuss any of this without getting into a discussion and debate about the nature of consciousness. What is consciousness? Is it simply derived from our brains? And even if it is it something that someday we would be able to somehow transplant into a machine, upload into the cloud, merge with other intelligences, biological and post-biological? Or is the consciousness, the soul, for those of you who are religious, is it even the same thing? Is consciousness and the soul the same thing, or are these separate entities? Can it exist separate from the human body or any biological body? Can it be transplanted? Can it be uploaded? At what point would a machine become self-aware? And could we ever tell for sure? Some of you may have heard of the Turing test, named after the great British computer pioneer, Alan Turing. The Turing test basically says you have a computer, and then you have a person, and then you have another person, and if the person doing the assessment gets to the point where they can't tell whether it's the computer or the person that they're talking to, then maybe that's the point at which that machine has crossed that threshold. I think we must be careful here. Computers and computer programs can be very fast and very powerful, and they might be conversationally indistinguishable from humans, but could we ever be sure that they had genuinely become self-aware or not? I think the problem with a lot of this is that when you start discussing the technology of just a few years into the future from now, you are almost in a position where you have to discuss the philosophy as well. And these big questions like what is consciousness? What does it mean to be self-aware? If we create a robot and instill it with AI, and it is humaniform to the point that it is indistinguishable from a human being, when and if would it ever become something that we would classify as a living organism? Could we ever know for sure that it was self-aware and alive? Or might it just be doing a very good job of mimicking self-awareness and life? And like I say, could we ever know? Could we ever be sure? And if we can't be sure, what about the legal, moral, and ethical implications? At what point do we give our robots rights and responsibilities, but the basic fundamental human, rights. The right to life, the right to freedom, the right to be free of persecution for any belief you may hold, the right not to be enslaved. At what point do our robots, our machines, cease to be our tools and become, hopefully, our partners, our friends, but possibly our enemies if we're not careful? Elon Musk, of course, amongst others, has warned a lot about that. There are people actively working on, for example, giving rights to the great apes, the same sorts of rights that we have, not to be hunted, not to be put in a zoo. So those sorts of questions aren't in global strategic trends, but we must think about them, and we must think of these issues before we do these things, not after we do these things. It's too late then. Genie's out of the bottle. So this is something that governments and corporations need to be giving serious thought to. In global strategic trends, it does talk about how robots will probably by 2045 be handling a lot of child care, a lot of education, and a lot of elder care. We're already in an aging population, and with some of the medical advances that may be on the horizon, that issue is going to become even more profound. So the Global Strategic Trends document does say, which is interesting, the long-term psychological implications of educating our children and having them cared for at a young age by robots, those long-term psychological implications have yet to be assessed. Again, raises interesting questions about empathy and emotions, and where emotions sit in all of this debate that we should be having. Let me just, I want to go back to one point. The human augmentation sections of the Ministry of Defense document talk about this sort of direct interfacing, talks about AI, talks about humaniform robots. It also talks about potentially enhancing human abilities, both physically and cognitively, through things like exoskeletons and prosthetic limbs, maybe thought-controlled prosthetic limbs. What about, for example, enabling us to see in all spectrums, not just visible light? That's something that's talked about in the document. Enhancing physical strength, using genetic engineering perhaps to correct defects, cure some diseases, using some combination of prosthetics, nanotropics, implants, drugs, perhaps, to enhance human memory, human learning capacity. I mean, look, this is the X-Men, isn't it? This is the X-Men franchise. It's people who will be able to do things that we can't do. And the document does talk about the potential dangers, particularly if this technology is initially available, as most technologies are initially only available to the rich, to the elite, to the powerful. Is there a risk of humans and neo-humans? And I'm not even talking at this stage about artificial intelligence and machine intelligence, but imagine a world where humans are split into these two categories, those that can afford the implants, the surgeries, the enhancements, who can cure their illnesses and enhance their cognition and see across all spectrums. And I'm not being flippant with this, but jump tall buildings. And will there be envy? Will there be resentment? Will there be hatred? Will there be rebellion? H.G. Wells, the great sci-fi author, wrote in his classic book, The Time Machine, about a far future where the human race had split into two, the Morlocks and the Eloi. This Ministry of Defense document kind of hints around the edges of some of that. And the human augmentation section of that report is definitely one of the most thought-provoking and potentially disturbing parts of the document. I don't have time to get into other parts of the document, but it talks a lot about, obviously, things like climate change. It talks a lot about terrorism. We probably will see terrorists acquiring nuclear, chemical, biological weapons. We will get to a stage by 2045 when non-state actors, like big criminal consortia, will have, for example, the capability to launch their own satellites. We see now the space program moving slowly but inexorably out of the hands of government and into the hands of the private sector, whether it's SpaceX, Bigelow Aerospace, Virgin Galactic, whatever it is, and those are the ones we know about. I think it will be the same with some of these other technologies. So imagine a criminal consortium with the power to launch their own satellite. So those sorts of things. Again, it's slightly off topic, and I don't have time to get into that. There is a part of the Ministry of Defense, and by the way, I've mistitled that because us Brits spell defense with a C, before you corrupted our beautiful language. Sorry. The Defense and Security Accelerator is doing some things similar to maybe the DARPA program. Artificial intelligence engineers are pioneering a new military decision-making tool that can provide intelligence analysts cues to potential areas of interest or anomalies before an incident occurs. Did we just learn to tell the future? Not exactly. Not exactly. This is all about AI and big data and making predictions based on previous events. I mean, past performance is the best guide to future events. If you have a huge amount of data, if you have AI and algorithms, they can do a lot with it. But the system takes a broad range of incredibly complex data beyond the ability of analysts to simultaneously comprehend. And through the use of deep learning-based neural networks, is able to make confidence-based predictions of future events and outcomes of direct operational relevance to defense users. Well, you forget about the last bit of that quote. If you can make confidence-based predictions of future events about defense, you can make confidence-based predictions of future events about pretty much anything. The stock market, terror attacks. The 2045 document paints a picture of a future where we might get a cancer cure, but we might also get a terrorist with a nuclear bomb in a suitcase. We'll probably get both. We can't get these genies back into the bottle. We don't have a cancer cure. I'm not one of these people that believes Big Pharma is keeping us all sick because they're trying to make money off of drugs. I went in 2011, I think, to the Global Competitiveness Forum. It's actually the Arab world's equivalent of the World Economic Forum at Davos. President Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair from the UK was one of the speakers. Chief executives from almost every big company that matters were there. I'm just giving you a little insight into the mindset of these people. There's good news here. You might not believe me. I know a lot of people will say, no, I believe Big Pharma is keeping us sick to sell the drugs. I don't think so. If you believe that, we will have to agree to disagree. I got an insight into how these CEOs think, how they think the technology will change the world, where they want to go with this. In one sense, it's good news. The good news is they don't want you sick. Because if you're sick, yeah, you might buy their drugs. But if you're healthy, you'll buy their cars, their oil, their TVs, their sound systems. You'll buy everything. You will sell a lot more to a healthy person than a sick person, because they are consuming and they will carry on consuming for decades, hopefully. So the good news is that all these big corporations want you healthy, and they want you better off. That's good news as well. They want you better off. They want more money in your pocket, albeit they want that money in your pocket so you will go and buy stuff and put that money in their pocket. But it's good news. So one thing that probably is coming is a lot of genetic engineering to maybe deal with diseases that have genetic causes. Takes us into dangerous territory, of course. There's a whole separate debate to be had about, Frankenstein and again, whether we have the right to do this. Are we, with some of this technology, going to come dangerously close to the sorts of eugenics programs that so attracted the Nazis? Government think of everything in terms of threats and opportunities. That's a good thing to bear in mind when thinking about the government. Could be UFOs, could be these sorts of advanced technologies. If anyone in government is thinking about this, they are thinking about the threats and the opportunities. And there are usually both threats and opportunities. Very few things are single use. Pretty much everything can be weaponized. For every power and energy generation is another big part of the Global Strategic Trends document. For every thought that we might be able to generate unimaginable amounts of power, there is someone who is going to want to make that into a bomb. So the technology is what it is. It's what we do with that technology, how we take things forward, how we put in place checks and balances to stop some of these bad things happening. Sometimes life imitates art, art imitates life. Many of you will have noticed, I'm sure, some rather odd parallels between some of these statements I've been putting up and various science fiction movies. I mean, this prediction of future events and outcomes before they've taken place sounds like the precogs from Minority Report, right? Science fiction is becoming science fact. Art imitates life, life imitates art. I'm coming to the end of this presentation, just to show you, I mean, I took that photo a few months ago. Obviously, that you're not going to look at that and you know, think that's human. And at the moment, that can't do much more than you know, tell you which way the Starbucks is. But these corporations are hardly going to put their best tech out for everyone to take a look at. But there it is. Welcome to Silicon Valley. You know, SJC, San Jose Airport, heart of Silicon Valley. A lot of interesting stuff going on there. But that's not the most interesting thing going on at San Jose Airport. This is the most interesting thing going on at San Jose Airport. It's the kids playing with the robots. And the kids not playing with the robots because they're so used to the idea of robots and so comfortable with the idea of robots that once they've played the robots, they go back to some of those conventional toys. This is not a posed photo. I took that photo just as I was walking through the airport a few months ago. Children playing with the robots. Obviously, those robots are not humaniform. But if by 2045 we have robots that are indistinguishable from human beings, we have computer processing power 100,000 times more powerful than the human mind. If AI has crossed the line, would we ever know? I don't know. But become self-aware, then we will be in a very different place. Incidentally, let's hope life doesn't imitate art here, but the Ministry of Defense has a big, fully integrated computer system, satellites, battlefield communications, weapons, everything all tied into each other. Guess what we called it? Skynet. Not very smart. For those of you that don't know, that's from the Terminator movies. That is pretty much, I have 5 minutes, so okay, thank you. That's pretty much the end of the formal part of this presentation. So as I've got 5 minutes, I'm going to use them. And I'm just going to make a few wrap-up remarks. Firstly, I know I've said this about a dozen times, but I repeat it for a reason. It really is worth your time reading some of these documents on the Ministry of Defense website. Firstly, as I say, unlike a lot of alleged government documents you sometimes hear about, there are no questions about the authenticity and the source of these documents. So do, please, go read them tonight in your hotel room and go to that section on human augmentation. Go to the bits on robots and AI. Pick out the other things that I haven't had a chance to talk about here today that interest you. Climate change is in there. Transportation is in there. Future cities is in there. Crime is in there. So go and check out that. Go and check out some of those other documents I mentioned as well. Human-machine teaming. Now you know the term. Google it and have a look at what other governments have put out on there. There's a lot hiding in plain sight. The best place to hide a book is in a library. The best place to hide a tree is in a forest. There is a lot. I am not a whistleblower. This was an unclassified presentation, sourced entirely from the Ministry of Defense website, and I made it clear when I was moving away from that and into speculation when I started talking about could we ever know if a machine becomes self-aware. But let me just conclude by tying it back to the whole UFO question. The reason when I was invited to this symposium and when I found out the theme of this particular conference this year, the reason I decided to present this was, as I said at the beginning, because disclosure or discovery will be very different if it occurs in 2045 as opposed to if it occurs now, because we will be very different. Humanity is not a fixed entity. This is not a single point, a single fixed point in time. We are evolving. We've always evolved. Heck, anatomically modern humans only emerged, what, about 200,000 years ago. The ape-human split was 5 million years ago. By 2045, we have British Ministry of Defense documents saying it's possible that the nature of what it means to be human will have fundamentally changed. The fundamental distinctions between, say, humans and machines might have broken down. So we are on a journey. We do have some choices. We have some moral, legal, and ethical issues to think about, all these human augmentation issues, about the rise of the machines, machine intelligence, robot rights. But as I say, it's no good thinking about any of this after it happens. We need to think about it now. You need to think about it personally. You may, in your lifetime, have choices to make that arise from some of what I have presented here this afternoon. The ultimate irony would be if we do end up losing our humanity. And I know a lot of people say, I never want to lose my humanity. But A, we don't have a choice in evolution, or certainly not in part of it. Random mutation and natural selection play a part. We may be able to choose some other things when it comes to technology, but humans are changing. And the ultimate irony would be if, when we make first contact, open first contact, not this is what happened at Roswell or whatever it might be, when we make open first contact with visiting extraterrestrials, we might find that they are those immortal thinking machines that Stephen Dick spoke about at the Royal Society conference. But if that first contact doesn't happen soon, we might find that we ourselves have become or evolved into those immortal thinking machines. So forget ideas of humans meeting aliens, and just think of, post-biologicals from Earth meeting post-biologicals from somewhere else. Thank you very much.